Excellence is an art won by training and habituation. We do not act rightly because we have virtue or excellence, but rather we have those because we've acted rightly. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Fellow Toastmasters, guests, I want to talk to you today about the power of habit. This quote I just quoted from Aristotle goes back over 2,000 years, but it still rings true today. The benefit that we have today is that there's been a lot more research done on why habits exist, how we can go about changing habits. So we all understand the power of habit, just like Aristotle did 2,000 years ago. But the good news is we've got a little bit more research and a little bit more understanding of how habits work and what we can do to change them. And so, pretty alarming statistic for me, and maybe for you guys as well, that 40 to 45% of what we do on a daily basis isn't decision, it's habit. So knowing that, if we can do something to change our habits, I mean, half of what we do is on autopilot. And so I'm going to talk to you guys today about the basics of habit. And there's a fellow by the name of Charles Duhigg. He wrote the book, The Power of Habit. He broke down habits and how they're formed and why they exist and how you can go about reprogramming your mind, reprogramming these habits. And so basically what a lot of his research showed and what he put out in his book, The Power of Habit, talked about there being a habit loop. And if you don't write down anything else in my whole speech, write down these three things. That the habit loop consists of a cue, a routine, and a reward. And it's really important to understand the cue, the routine, the reward. These three things, because understanding them helps you reprogram. And what you can do, it works similarly when you're trying to erase a bad habit. It works very similar to implementing a new good habit. And so, when I look at this stuff and I read it and I think to myself, what can I do? The more good habits you have in place, the more things you have that help you, live an excellent life, a happier life, a more productive life, personal, health, business, all of it. If I can be excellent on autopilot, things will be pretty good. And so there's things you can do to create. What you want to do is, rather than say, I want to exercise, I want to exercise, I want to exercise, that's the routine. You want to focus on the cue and the reward. And so if you can control the cue and the reward, then the new routine becomes habit. And so an example of this is you put a pair of sneakers next to your bed that you can't wake up and get your day started without going by these. And so you're trying to control something that cues the exercise, not just saying, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to exercise, and then also putting a reward at the end. It's one of the experiments he talked about a piece of chocolate. I would probably say a healthier snack that makes you feel good. If you really like the taste of a smoothie, then you can have that as a reward at the end. My personal opinion when I was looking at some of this stuff is that, the endorphin kick and all the great stuff you feel from exercise could and should be reward enough. But it's this point that you're trying to control the cue and the reward and not just say, I'm going to create a new habit, I'm going to do it over and over until, because this is kind of the stuff that makes it permanent is creating the cue and the reward. And so I'm also going to talk about an experiment he did called the cookie experiment, where you can break down habits that you want to break, and how can I do that? And so this was a really interesting experiment, and I'll use some examples here to kind of cement the idea. Let's say that every day around 3 o'clock, Kevin gets up from his desk, and he walks by a vending machine, and he grabs a couple cookies. He takes those cookies over to Mark Thompson's desk, and they chat, Mark gives him some words of encouragement. They talk about work, the struggles Kevin's having, and Mark, tells him, well, you can do this and that, And for 10 minutes every day, that's just the routine. The cue is it's mid-afternoon, he's been in his office for 7 hours, he wants to get up, and really it's one of these things that the person doesn't even realize it's happening. It's part of your 40 or 45% that's just autopilot. You just do it. But then after a year, you realize when your wife says, "Hey Kevin, put on 10 or 12 pounds there, bud. What's going on?" You think to yourself, "Well, I have a cookie every afternoon."
Cookies.
And when you come home, Kevin, you seem like you're a little lethargic at 5 o'clock when you come home. Is your work that draining? What's going on? And so, in order to really break that habit, you got to break down what's the cue, what's the reward. Now, you could guess at different reasons. I'm addicted to chocolate. I like the sugar. That being the reward. But maybe that's not the reward. Maybe the cue of being in your desk, I've got to get up, and the reward, isn't as obvious as one might think. So in this experiment, what he did was he cut out different pieces that could be the reward. If you got up and got an apple and went to Mark's desk, try that. Or if you got up and didn't have anything and went to Mark's desk. Or if you got up and just had the cookie and didn't go talk to Mark. Maybe it's the socialization. Maybe it's the sugar kick. Could be from an apple or from a cookie. Maybe it's the movement in your body. But this was a really good example in my mind of you've got a habit formed, and before you really understand the cue or the reward, you can't go about changing it. So long story short, in this experiment, it was the socialization that person craved, and that was the reward. So he could get up, he could have an apple, he could walk around the building and go talk to his colleagues for 10 minutes. It was a break in the day where, after hours and hours of doing, the day-to-day functions and the stuff that was in front of the computer, his body craved that. His body didn't crave the sugar, didn't crave, anything in that chocolate chip cookie. It just became part of the routine. And therefore it was a habit. So with that, I'd like all of us to kind of look at different things we do in our life that may just be autopilot. I've got some neat habits that I've created in other areas, business-wise and personal-wise, and it got me thinking about these things, how the habit of leaving a glass of ice water next to the bed for my wife has created some positive in our relationship. And so with that, I'd like to challenge everybody to go home, think about either a good habit that you'd like to implement or a bad habit that you'd like to change. Remember that the cue, the routine, and the reward are the 3 pieces of the habit loop, and you want to look at how to control the cue and the reward, and the routine will follow. Thank you.